Good morning, everybody. We'll just wait a few seconds for people to join. Welcome to the Go for Growth webinar on credibility and accreditations. We have got a few people signed up for today, so I will just give it a few minutes for people to get online. What I will do, just as people are joining, is go through the agenda for today and some housekeeping. So please be aware that the session is being recorded today. A copy of the recording will be sent out to you. We usually aim to get them out within 24, 48 hours of the webinar. So hopefully you'll get that later today or tomorrow. You'll also get a copy of the slide deck that we're using today. So please don't worry about having to make tons of notes unless you want to. We are on Zoom, so we have both chat and Q&A functionality today. If you have questions that you have, please could you use the Q&A? If you do want to chat though, if you want to say hi, introduce yourself, feel free. You can use the chat functionality for that. I will keep an eye on both as we go through. If you've got questions that you want to ask as we go through, please don't feel like you have to wait till the end, but we do have some time set aside at the end if we need it for questions. So we're looking at credibility and accreditations. What does that mean? So we're going to start with some feedback from providers actually around what that looks and feels like for smaller organisations that we're supporting. We're going to think about what credibility means in the context of public procurement. And we're also going to think about what procurers have been saying through some research that we've done. We'll have a quick overview of accreditations. How might you think about it, approach it, what might be relevant, where can you go to find out? And then we're going to finish with an acronym called RICE. So we'll talk through what RICE means. And then our contact details will be at the back end of the slide deck. So if you wanted to have a chat with us in Go for Growth afterwards, or if you wanted to book a one-to-one session via Teams, you can do so. All of our details will be there. And there's also details of how you can stay in touch with us if you want to. So let's get started. We have got time set aside for 45 minutes. If we don't need it all, we'll close up early, but we'll not finish any later than 45 minutes. So if we start by thinking about what providers have been saying to us, what businesses have been saying to us, and we're supporting 11,000 organisations in some way, shape or form at the minute. And although there are absolutely no closed doors in Go for Growth, any organisation of any size from any sector and any geographical location can come to Go for Growth for support, and we will do everything we can to help. Unsurprisingly, the vast majority, around 90% of all businesses that we're supporting, would classify themselves as small, so 0 to 49 employees. That includes micro businesses, and it also includes sole traders, so that 0 to 49 employees. And so what people are telling us is that, and they're not sure which accreditations are needed sometimes to be able to win work in the public sector. 53% of people that we polled specifically about accreditations told us that they weren't sure what they needed. And so some help would be useful in terms of figuring out what accreditations would likely to be asked for, dependent on the sector and the client that you potentially would want to work with. 30% of people that we polled specifically said, actually, we would like to understand financial credibility in more detail. And in public sector, there are two types of evaluation and testing that goes on in public sector. So you have two different types of criteria. You have selection criteria and you have evaluation criteria. And at the front end of any procurement, you'll have some sort of selection criteria. And in some cases, you might need to meet a financial threshold in order to be able to continue in a procurement competition. Not always, but it does happen. You might need to give a parent company guarantee, but your financial standing, your economic and financial standing is usually tested at the front end of that procurement. So 30% of people that we were chatting to about credibility and accreditation said that they would probably want some more help to understand what that financial credibility looks like. And that might be as simple actually as a credit score, but it could often be more complicated than that. Interestingly, lots of businesses that we chatted to, 45% of them, so just under half, said they had more than 3 accreditations. And of course, one of the things that we know about accreditations are that they are often not free to get. I will talk to you through one of the accreditations that Go for Growth has to offer that is free, but generally speaking, if you're going for things like Cyber Essentials, information assurance for small to medium enterprises, a CHAS accreditation, which is Contractors Health and Safety System, construction line, etc., etc. Generally speaking, an accreditation, it will have a cost implication for you as an organisation, and that will be an annual cost implication per year for your organisation. And so actually it was quite surprising, I guess, to Go for Growth that almost half of the businesses that we talked to had more than 3 accreditations. And what we think is driving that is this need to have what our particular client that we want to work for wants us to have. So some might ask us to be construction line silver if we're in construction. Some might ask for a CHAS accreditation. What we should see in public sector is or equivalent. So you must have Cyber Essentials or equivalent. You must have an information assurance accreditation, ISO 27001 or equivalent. And that is really helpful so that you don't have to get variations of a theme. So there are more than one accreditation often in a particular sector that does the same kind of thing. So the or equivalent additional wording in a public sector competition can often be useful and would prevent people from having to have multiple accreditations, especially when they're very similar, purely to be able to take part in an opportunity. And if it doesn't say or equivalent in the competition space, what we would suggest is that you ask a clarification question to see whether an accreditation that you've got would be accepted rather than the accreditation that's being asked for. So there are some things that you can do if you're being asked for something that you don't have, but you have something similar. And really interesting, so almost a quarter of everybody that we talked to said they would actually decline to put a bid in if they had to get additional accreditations. And a lot of that is driven by cost, but also time. So accreditations are often not free, but they are always have some sort of time requirement on them to get them. And again, they are generally speaking, not always, but they are generally speaking an annual or a 2-year cycle, something like that, usually annual cycles. And so this is a repeat activity that you would need to do on an annual basis. And so 22% of providers said that actually that would put them in a no bid space if they had to do something like that. Now, I've got some stats on the next slide, actually, to chat you through some research that we did with YPO as an organisation, specifically around what public sector buyers are talking about. But this aims to look at what it means from a contextual perspective in the public sector. So some of the things that the public sector are trying to work through, and some of this will be through that selection criteria that we talked about. Effectively, they're trying to build confidence, and what you're doing as a bidder is trying to instill confidence in whoever is evaluating this bid that you can deliver what's required to the level that's required throughout the contract period, throughout the duration of the contract, however that long that might be, whether that's 2 years, 4 years, 5 years. And in the future, under the Procurement Act, frameworks will be able to be let for up to 8 years. And so some of those timescales might elongate out further. And there are some caveats to that in that a framework that is being let for 8 years would have to be reopened at least twice. But arguably, what we're doing is the same, regardless of the length of the contract. What a buyer is trying to do is to be confident that what they're buying can be delivered in the way that they want to. And so what you'll be asked about is, who have you worked for before? So in a public sector procurement, you're asked about your references. And it's up to 3 usually that you're asked for. And it's important that wording is specific, so it's up to 3. You don't usually have to give all 3 references. But if you can't give any, if you're a startup, then there is usually in a public sector bid a space to say, here, if you can't provide at least 1 reference, then here is a section where you can write 500 words about what you've done, what your capability is. And effectively, that's what it's testing, your capability and to an extent your capacity to do what's needed to do. And so thinking about who you've worked for before, so for example, in the NHS, if you work for Great Ormond Street Hospital, that is a really pivotal brand in London hospitals, and that really makes other NHS trusts see that you have got some credibility in there. You're doing this for a big brand already, and so that instinctively develops some confidence. You can't be scored in terms of just that instinctive reaction. Will they do it for gosh, and so therefore it's okay? But through that selection, you'll be asked about who you've worked for before, and those references will be helpful. Similarly, having case studies, testimonials, those pre-made references, so that it's not just you saying that you are capable, confident, competent, all of those things, but that you are demonstrating it and evidencing those things through case studies, asking your customers and potentially your suppliers as well to give you references and to give you testimonials that you can publicly put on your shopfront, whether that's a website or whatever you use. And also you can use them in the competition space and even grant funding space if it's required, to help create that credibility in your ability and competence going forward. And some of it is around how we talk about the organisation that we are. So do you promote your organisation? We actually have a webinar coming up on promoting your organisation, where we really sort of try to get into detail of how might you do that? How do you have a voice? Where do you have a voice? Where are your customers? One of the things that we talk to the public sector about is, if you want to talk to the marketplace, go where they are. And the same applies, actually, if you want to promote your organisation to your client, go where they are. So do you join conversations on LinkedIn? Do you have good quality comms that goes out, that's targeted, et cetera, et cetera? And actually, if you've been on the awards circuit at all, that can be really helpful. What that does is an independent verification of what you do and how you do it to a particular standard. So any awards are always really useful for showing that you've been through a judging process and have been found to be doing really well. And of course, you might be part of membership schemes. So I've mentioned things like Construction Line Silver. So if you are a member of Construction Line and you have been assessed to silver level, then actually sometimes that will be enough for that selection criteria. They would use what's been assessed in that Construction Line Silver rather than assessing it through selection. So it can often be really useful to be members of appropriate schemes that will be relevant to your sector and also to the public sector. And credibility also, as we've mentioned before, does look at that financial stability. So you might be asked to, on a self-cleaning basis, to confirm that if you were required to, you could submit 2 years worth of audited accounts, audited if they're needed to be audited accounts. It might be that you need to have some sort of bond in place or a parent company guarantee if you have a parent company. And that will really be determined by the size, the value, the risk profile, and the complexity of the contract that you're going through. And in all cases, the requirement for your financial stability should be proportionate to all of those things. So what you're being asked for, if you're asked for some sort of bond or a parent company guarantee, for example, should be proportionate with the value, complexity, risk, etc. of the contract that you're going for. And if you don't think it is proportionate, then you can always ask a clarification question. But some of the things that you might consider before you bid for an opportunity is how big is your business versus the size of opportunity. So if you won this contract, it would then become 90% of your income. That may not be where the public sector wants to be. It might not be where you want to be. And one of the things you might consider is, if we ever didn't retain this contract, what would that mean to my business? And if I have to recruit people in order to execute that contract, if we didn't retain it at some point, does that mean I'm then losing people out of my business, either under TUPE or through redundancy, independently, etc.? Do you know what your liquidity days are as an organisation? So Go for Growth, I'm a procurement professional by trade. So one of the things I did when I studied for my procurement exams was accountancy. And so I was taught liquidity days. As a small business, a micro social enterprise owner, we spend a lot of time thinking about our liquidity days, and effectively what that means, if no more money came in, how long could we trade? And that gives you a real sense of your financial risk profile. And whilst I've never been asked, actually, and I don't believe I've ever seen it be asked for in a public sector competition, your liquidity days, it's a useful tool as business owners to understand our own financial stability and liquidity. And so you can have a look at it. When we send the slides out, I will send a couple of links with the email that comes out around parent company guarantees. There's 2 links that we found that might be useful, so you can have a look in more detail at what a PCG might mean for your organisation. So there's just a few things that I wanted to chat through on this one, 5 things over a couple of slides. There's a link in the bottom right corner of the screen. If you want to go and see the full survey that Go for Growth did with YPO, you can click on that link and scroll down till you find the iGov survey. But we had a look at bid competition and capability, and this is 150 buyers that were surveyed in public sector, and 64% of survey participants cited bid competition capability as a potential barrier to SME adoption. And that was particularly significant for local government respondents, with 43 out of 88 participants stating that they found it to be a barrier. So one of the things that you can do to build your credibility is to really focus on your bid capability. Do you have all your tools in your toolkit in order to be a credible part of that competition process? And we do have some support for that, which I'll get to shortly. But you can think about, actually, how can I invest in myself, my business, my team, in order to be competition ready? And that will hopefully help to remove a barrier and build that credibility. Also, procurement are thinking about scaling service delivery. So what you will see in public sector competitions often is, here is what we think the value of the total contract or framework might be, but there's no guarantee that that's what it will look like. So actually, sometimes it might be less, but sometimes equally it might be more. There might be growth in that contract from after you've taken it. And in a previous business that I've run, we really saw that growth quite aggressively. And so the ability to scale service delivery, one of the things that the public sector procurement competition aims to test is, can you deliver this through the life of the contract? Now, of course, we can't test what we don't know. So if we don't know that there's going to be growth, then we can't test that particularly well. However, one of the areas that is a concern for the public sector is that there might not be the ability to scale, and certainly the rapidity of that scale. If you have to scale quickly, can smaller organisations do that as rapidly as they need to? And so actually, one of the things that you might think about having in your toolkit is, how would I grow? If I win this contract and this contract grew, do I have a plan? Do I have tools in my toolkit that will help me to grow in line with the speed of that growth that's required? And that isn't an investment piece at this point, but it is a thinking piece, I think, a consideration piece for small businesses. And having that thought process in the bag will help build your credibility, because you will be able to talk about that if you're required to. If you think about risk management, 32% of survey participants identified risk management as a barrier potentially to working with smaller organisations. Risk management is, it should be a crucial element for any business owner like we are, any smaller organisation, it will be a consideration for larger organisations. So public sector buyers will have risk registers. They will be thinking about, when they're putting the contract together, what risks are inherent in that contract, sector, marketplace, etc., and how they mitigate that risk. And so actually, if you are able to demonstrate good quality risk management and a really comprehensive approach to identifying, managing and mitigating risk in your organisation, that will be useful in building your credibility. Often you might see in a public sector bid, have you got a risk register? What does that look like? And that's one of the mechanisms of testing your ability as a provider to identify, manage and mitigate risk. So again, one of those things for us to consider when we are seeking to compete for public sector opportunities. And then actually, we were talking about who do you work for, your references. So there is an unconscious bias, and it doesn't flow through to the competition space because it can't. But actually, there is a tendency subconsciously to prefer to work with previous suppliers or providers, or with well-known and established suppliers. So if part of your shopfront, part of your bid is, we have worked with these people before, even if that was in a different sector, then actually that will help build your credibility. It's more challenging if you're a startup because that historic legacy isn't there. But there are other mechanisms, obviously, for being able to create that confidence in your capability and your ability in that public sector bid that we've talked about before. You do have the ability to do that. But if we know that using those references, using those case studies will help overcome many of these unconscious biases, then that is a useful thing for us. As I say, it can't be tested, it can't flow through into the competition because it's not allowed to by law, but it's worth knowing that building your credibility, thinking about who you've worked with before, can be super helpful. And then actually what we tested was, do public sector buyers always know what their spend is with small to medium enterprises? 46% said that small to medium enterprises accounted for less than half, roughly half or less than half of their overall procurement spend. There were some respondents that said they didn't know what the volume of contracts to smaller enterprises was. However, 46% knew. The majority of that 46% estimated it was around 25% or below. And the reason that I've brought this up today in terms of a credibility and accreditations webinar is that the Procurement Act 2023, the new regulations that will come into force on the 28th of October, are really enshrining in law this drive that we've seen over recent years for public procurement to be more accessible to the whole market. And it moves us the duty on from not just considering what the barriers to entry and growth are for small to medium enterprises, but to make steps to remove those barriers. So how can we remove those barriers to entry and growth? And so actually there is a genuine drive to be open for business, to remove any obstacles or as many obstacles as possible so that small to medium enterprises, micro, sole trader organisations, voluntary sector organisations have equitable opportunity in comparison with their larger counterparts to take part in public competitions, both directly and indirectly with the public sector. So it's an important time. And I think if we tested these stats as we plan to do in 1 year, 2 years time, etc., and see what the migration of these stats are, then I think we'll see that there'll be more spend going to SMEs, and some of these concerns will be shifting. I'll just check if there are any questions so far. Not yet. So if we look at accreditations, I used to run a stray dog kennels and a care farm business. So we offered land and animal-based opportunities for vulnerable children and adults. We actually didn't need any accreditations to deliver the care farm. We didn't need to be CHAS accredited to run the stray kennels. However, Actually, all we needed was our license and our insurance and a handful of policies like health and safety and safeguarding. However, we decided to become CHAS accredited because of the health and safety risks involved in dealing with animals and stray dogs. And we also opted to become CVAS accredited, which is the Countryside Educational Visits Accreditation Scheme. And that was to enable us to demonstrate that we were able to operate educational visits on the care farm. In later years, our customers were becoming more nervous of things like cyber risks, and they were pushing us towards Cyber Essentials or even Cyber Essentials Plus. And that's likely to become a red line for some people in the future. But I guess the point is, you have two ways of looking at it. So what accreditations do your business need in order to operate? So is there any mandatory? So you may need to be registered with the Care Quality Commission. I know that's not accreditation, but you might need something that effectively allows your business to operate. And you might need to be accredited to a certain level, for example. Are there any accreditations that you must have in your toolkit in order to be compliant with the business that you're delivering? And then there's this second lens, the lens that I've described. Are there accreditations that would complement your business and potentially set you apart from your competitors? So we were one of the only kennels and care farm businesses in our region, if not the only one, that were CHAS accredited. And we were the only one, other than two other farms in Yorkshire that were CVAS accredited. And so it really narrowed our competitive market for us and allowed us to put our head above the parapet and use something that was independently verified to set us apart. I used to run procurement for Nottingham Trent University, and we went for the SIPS Procurement Excellence Programme standard. And that was really all about investing in an accreditation that would show the families of our students and learners themselves that we were a safe pair of hands with their student fee money. And it improved our offer actually and helped us attract not just students to the university, but potentially it helped us attract lecturers, it helped us attract staff, both inside procurement and outside of procurement. So getting those badges and being independently verified in any accreditation can be really useful. Something to note, you shouldn't be asked to have everything in place when you bid. You should be asked whether you've got it already or if you commit to getting something for the contract start date. And even then, you might not be asked for all accreditations to be in place on contract start date. So, for example, I've worked on a procurement where Cyber Essentials needed to be in place for contract start date, but Information Assurance accreditation for small to medium enterprises, the IASME accreditation, had to be in place for 1 year in advance. So, or within the first year of the contract. So you won't always have to have everything, even at contract start date, and it will all be clear in the procurement competition what you're being asked for and when you would need to have it in place. Go for Growth, we have gone through the Cyber Essentials accreditation because we are seeing in more and more procurements that you need to have that in your toolkit in order to take part. So there will be some accreditations that mean you wouldn't necessarily be able to take part if you don't have it, or you will have to have it for contract start date. And depending on when that is, the process of getting it might not be possible if you don't already have it in your toolkit. So things to think about. Why are your customers asking for what they're asking for? As I've just explained, as a business owner and as a procurement organisation, I knew what I was asking my organisation to do and why I was asking to do it. Your customers will know why they're asking for it. If you need any clarification around that, you can use clarification questions to do so. You'll be considering, of course, what is the cost of getting and keeping that accreditation. And as I've mentioned already, if your customer asks for a different version of accreditation you already have, if it doesn't say or equivalent in the procurement competition already, you can go to that customer through the competition clarification questions process and ask them what it is. Will they accept the accreditation that you've already got? So I mentioned the Procurement Act a little bit already, but the Act is aiming to reduce cost barriers for suppliers, especially smaller business and startups, by not requiring those businesses to bear the expense of obtaining a certain certification or accreditation upfront. Specifically, the Act emphasises creating a more inclusive and flexible procurement process. And as I've mentioned, contracting authorities are encouraged to consider the barriers faced by small to medium enterprises and take reasonable steps to remove or reduce those barriers. And that can include allowing suppliers to obtain necessary accreditations after they've been awarded the contract, and that prevents those high upfront costs from deferring potential bidders. So the regulations that are due to come into force on the 28th of October are really genuinely trying to enshrine that duty on public sector buyers to it be accessible, to be flexible, and to make sure that they are really not just considering what the barriers are that would face small to medium enterprises, but also to take those reasonable steps to remove or reduce those barriers as far as is as appropriate and applicable. And so I did just want to tell you about an accreditation that you can get through Go for Growth. It is free of charge. It renews annually. There is some light touch reviewing activity after a year, but generally speaking, you would take the accreditation and then you would be sense checking if anything's changed at your annual review point. And it's the Public Sector Supply Ready accreditation. And effectively, as we've talked about, do you have all of these things in your toolkit? The PSSR, the Public Sector Supply Ready accreditation, is a method of checking whether you've got everything in your toolkit for a public sector competition. And if you haven't, helping you fill those gaps. So there's lots and lots of embedded resources in the PSSR. So if you don't have case studies, for example, then it will help you look at different types of case studies as examples to help you decide what kind of case study you want to put in place. Video, for example, versus a documented case study. Is it from a supplier? Is it from a customer? Etc. etc. Certification comes with 12 hours of continued professional development, which is admissible in a public sector bid as part of your social value. You are committed to continued professional development. And you can see on the screen all of the things I've just said. One of the big things it does is it takes you through the standard selection questionnaire. So where anything is generic, so it won't ask you about your insurances, it won't ask you about whether you'll use subcontractors because they will differ from competition to competition, but it will take you through the generic parts of the standard selection questionnaire. So without the clock ticking and outside of a competition space, you can have a think about whether you've got everything that you need for that selection questionnaire, and then it will go through really looking at all of the things that you're likely to be asked in most public sector competitions. And it's a way of showing your potential client that you are invested, you're prepared, you're ready to take part. And that can really help you stand out in what can often be a crowded marketplace. Once you graduate the accreditation, you get a certificate. You get 2 certificates. You get your certificate for the actual Public Sector Supply Ready accreditation, and you also get your continued professional development 12 hours of CPD certificate. You get the Public Sector Supply Ready logo that you see on screen that you can put all over your social media, your email signature, etc. And we give you pre-made social media banners that you can use to then promote that you've become PSSR accredited, and we will re-promote any of those things. If you tag Go for Growth, we'll re-promote and reshare those things. And we do also let our customers in Go for Growth know that when the marketplace becomes public sector supply ready, because it can be helpful when they are looking for organisations to invite to take part in competitions. And the final thing I wanted to chat through was RICE. So this is all about making it work, and public procurement loves an acronym. And I am a 30-year procurement professional, so clearly there had to be an acronym somewhere. RICE is all about, and I can't take any credit for it. So it was an old colleague of mine at YPO that developed rice, but it's all about researching. So understanding how your public sector organisations that you want to work for, how do they approach their procurement activity? What do they want? What do they need? And there are two ways of doing that. So if you're looking at opportunities over £2 million in value, total contract value, then one of the things the public sector regulations through the National Procurement Policy Statement is enshrining is that there should be a pipeline. Lots of public sector organisations are going lower than 2 million. So you could look at the pipeline and it will be on the central digital platform that comes with the Procurement Act 2023. It should also right now be on their website if they've got one, pipeline that is, not website. But there's also a contract register. So spend over £500 should be being published on a contract register on the organisation's website, and it should publish the level of spend and also who it's with, unless it is redacted for any security reasons. So you can have a look at what your potential client is spending, who with, and through the pipeline, if they've got one, you'll be able to see when that might go out to market so you can prepare ready for an impending competition. And that helps you actually move on to the next stage about being informed. So be informed and inform your potential customer. Let them know what you're doing. So that promoting your organisation piece that we talked about. Have you got a shop front? Have you got your case studies? Are you joining conversations on social media? How are you getting your potential customer? How are you raising that awareness in them about what you're doing? And how do you inform yourself around what their requirements are and the kinds of conversations that they're having, what's important to them? And then you can collaborate. So if you're a member of a trade body, Federation of Small Businesses, local chambers, there are membership organisations that are very sectorally driven, like Clinks, for example. If you are members of any trade association, you can leverage that membership to lobby or engage, and they will often be able to create introduction for you into customers where you might want to build a relationship. And you can also work with other suppliers to strengthen your offer where that's appropriate. We're seeing a lot more collaboration, and we're running another session this year that is all about how do you collaborate and carving out a space actually for businesses to meet each other where they want to seek out a partner to work with. And then the final part of RICE is that evidence. So if you've come along to any tender ready training that Go for Growth does, what you'll have heard already is that in the evaluation criteria, it will always be seeking evidence of what you're writing down in terms of your answers to quality, technical and social value questions. So if you say you're doing something, you need to also say how you're doing it. And if you can back up what you're writing down in your responses in a public sector tender with evidence of that, evidence of what you do or what you will do, creating that confidence in your infrastructure to be able to deliver what's required, that evidence is super important and will likely be helpful to creating better scores in those tenders that you're taking part in. As I said, we have our contact details here, so you can sign up to hear more from Go for Growth using that QR code. You can get in touch with myself or my colleague Lauren. Our contact details are there. We have a bookable calendar, so you can choose to book a 30 minutes Teams chat with either of us. You can do that at a time that's convenient for you through that bookable calendar. And if you did want to look at the Public Sector Supplier Ready accreditation, it's through this link here on screen. So that PSSR link is where you need to go. Have a look. There's only 3 steps in it. It should take no more than 12 hours to do. There is no clock ticking. You can take it at your leisure. If there are any questions on it, please do give us a shout. And then we have just set up our membership resources on our website. Again, all free of charge. If you follow our website link here to the login page, we ask for a few details from you. You can opt in or out of our newsletter at the same time, and you'll have access to all our videos, all our papers, all our templates, by a sort of sector. So if you're looking for bid skills type resources, you can go in there. If you're looking for Procurement Act type resources, you can go into there. It's all free of charge, so you can get lots and lots of help and support through our website. So please feel free to go there. And then I will open up for questions. So if there are any questions, and I will stop sharing my screen, please do feel free to pop them in the Q&A or the chat now. And it always happens to me, if when we close the webinar down and you later find you have a question, use those contact details. You can always email myself or Lauren, or you can book a Teams call with us. We're always happy to have a coffee and a chat. So if there is anything that doesn't spring to mind right now, but does later on, please do feel free to get in touch whenever. I will just check if we've got any questions in there. There's nothing at the moment. We're 5 minutes ahead of time. So what I will say is thank you ever so much to everyone that's joined us today. It was great to see so many of you here. We'll get the information out to everyone that registered over the next 24, 48 hours. If we can be of any support or any help, please, please do get in touch. We're here to help. Thank you ever so much. Have a great rest of your Tuesday.